Thanks for tuning in to Written on Edge, Season 7, Episode 38. I'm Van Sebastian, here with my co-host, S.A. Baz Collins.
Howdy, howdy.
And we're really glad you're here with us. On today's show, Michael G. Williams joins us to discuss his several series and how they impact queer life and queer joy, followed by Our Review of Wildhood, and then Baz and I will share what's held our attention this week. So if you like hearing updates from new queer content creators, support us on Patreon, hit our merch store, sign up for our stuff on YouTube. But now, on to our guest. Michael G. Williams writes queer-themed science fiction, urban fantasy, and horror, celebrating monsters, macabre humor, and subverted expectations. He's the author of 3 series for Falstaff Books, the award-winning vampire urban fantasy series The Withrow Chronicles, a new urban fantasy series featuring real estate, time travel, and San Francisco's most beloved historic figures, Servant Sovereign, and the science fiction noir autumn detective novels. Michael also co-hosts Arcane Carolinas, hosts and produces Social Distancing Radio, and contributes to tabletop RPG development. He strives to present the humor and humanity at the heart of horror and mystery with his stories of outcasts and loners finding their people. He lives in Durham, North Carolina with his husband, a variety of animals, and more and better friends than he will admit to deserving. And yeah, I changed that last line.
That's okay.
Welcome back to the show.
Thank you. It's really, really great to do this.
So how have you been?
Here. Good. You know, the world is a weird and complicated place at the moment. And what is time? Like, I remember doing an episode with y'all before. If you asked me when that happened, I would have literally no idea. As far as I know, it was sometime between 1992 and yesterday. So, you know,
That's
but
fair.
otherwise, I'm good. I'm in grad school and I have a couple of shows, and there's writing and there's day job stuff. So my brain is, constantly doing this.
Do you actually sleep, or have you found a way to avoid that movement necessity?
One of my best friend
Maybe
put
he's
it.
a vampire.
I might be. I don't know. You can't see whether those windows are open. I'm not sure.
Well,
anyway,
you could be a day walker,
That's true. I could. No, my best friend once said, "You do a lot." And I was like, yeah, I do a lot. That's a pretty good way of putting it. I do sleep. Traditionally, I'm not somebody who sleeps as much as other people, but, whatever.
Very nice.
Because you got things to do.
Things to do.
Yeah, life is short, and I want to have a lot done when mine is over. Hopefully many years from now.
Yeah.
Nice. So for folks who did not hear your first interview, just give us a quick how you started as a writer, but then we'll dive into the topics.
Sure. I grew up in a weird little obscure corner of Appalachia, and in a really strong sort of storytelling tradition family, and grew up listening to people tell stories, and a lot of them were very scary stories. I grew up, to put it as kindly as possible, I was raised by absolutely bananas fundamentalist evangelicals. And so I grew up in this context of like, the world is full of supernatural forces, and if we talk about them, then they probably will be given power over us. So we're never going to talk about it, but it's all real. So just be careful. And that kind of makes you into a horror kid. It also turns out that my mom, despite being like a pretty froth-mouthed evangelical at times in her life, is a huge fan of horror. And so like the last pop culture moment that we had together was watching the miniseries version of It in the 80s. Wow. Yeah. And that's the weirdest thing to say, but like religion turned my mother into a horror fan. I don't know. So anyway, I grew up.
The quote of the day right there.
Right. Well, yeah. And I can see the correlation, really.
Yeah.
That book is freaking scary.
They very strongly believed in this like very sort of bloody, serrated edged supernatural world. And that is the sort of thing, if you grow up steeped in it, then it sticks with you. And then in college, I was in a literary and artistic fraternity, a co-ed literary and artistic fraternity. I wrote a lot then, and I did NaNoWriMo for years and years and years, just as a personal project. And then basically one day a friend dared me to publish something that I had written. And so we sort of made a bet around, could I publish it and sell 10 copies to people I did not already know? And that was the start of my writing career.
Very nice. Now 3 series later.
Yeah, right? It turns out I could sell copies to 10 people.
Right.
And those 10 people keep buying.
Right. Well, gotta love real fans.
Yep.
So I love the tie-in to your past and where you came from, because one of our first topics is history.
Mm-hmm.
and bringing queer history to life in fiction, which ties into your Servant Sovereign series. Most recent book was out in April, but I don't think we've talked about the series yet. So if you could give us an overview.
Sure. So Servant Sovereign is a series of urban fantasy novellas. It's about two modern day queer witches who live in the Tenderloin in San Francisco. They live in an SRO. They're sharing a 6x9 room and in a hotel in the Tenderloin. And they're watching the city get bought up around them and taken over by obviously hostile outside forces. And so they decide to do something about it. They summon up the spirit or the real person or a simulacrum or something of Emperor Norton, of Joshua Norton. And they challenge him to travel through time with them and on their behalf to gather the keys to the city of San Francisco so that they can save its soul from a demon of real estate.
Was he also the protector of Mexico? I'm remembering
He was
my
Emperor of the United States and protector of Mexico.
Okay.
Yeah. He added that one on when Napoleon III invaded Mexico.
All right. I mean, if you're going to summon someone, that's the person you want.
Yeah.
Well, yeah.
They look
Make
back
life interesting.
They look back across the history of San Francisco and say, who's the person that cared the most? And that's what they get.
Now, is he with them for all three books or all three novellas?
Yeah.
Okay.
Mostly the books are him or them or the three of them together having to travel through time to different points in San Francisco's history to confront. They're never totally sure whether it's the same demon or is it different iterations of this demon. There's sort of an idea that there's this demon sort of exists outside of time and so is present in multiple times simultaneously.
Okay.
And so then the first one, Through the Doors of Oblivion, they have to send him back to the immediate aftermath of the earthquake of 1906 because they want him to save the first Bear Republic flag from being destroyed in the fire. And then in the second book, they do 1920s Chinatown, and they're running around with Donaldina Cameron and trying to save or trying to steal one of the axes from the hatchet men who worked for the Tongs in Chinatown. And then in the third book, they go to the Compton's Cafeteria riots of 1966.
And that just came out in April, right? That just came out in April?
Yes, yeah. And each of them is titled using a phrase from an obituary of Emperor Norton.
That's cool.
And so that one is Shut the Gates of Mercy. And it's a really angry, like, we're done being nice about this. We're done trying to do this the conventional way. Let's just go stab monsters kind of book. And that one's a lot of fun. But the Compton's Cafeteria riots were one of the Stonewalls,
right?
And so it's an important moment to talk about because it's a moment when queer rage sort of boiled over. I feel like San Francisco has always been this place where people could go and remake themselves, and they visit a ton of people in the course of this series where that happens, where they meet Emperor. I mean, obviously, they summon Emperor Norton, who is somebody who went to San Francisco and totally reinvented himself after losing everything. But then you look at the history of San Francisco, and you've got post-World War II sailors and GIs coming back from the war and never going back to the place they came from, and instead settling in San Francisco and forming communities there. There's a scene in the first book where Iria, who's the genderqueer witch who summons Norton in the first book, is explaining to him that the reason why they were interested in Norton is because Norton understands that about San Francisco, that San Francisco is a place that people make and where people make themselves into new people. And so they've literally summoned somebody who has reflected their own experience the most, because Iria is somebody who grew up in another place, and a lot of people had a lot of expectations around Iria and Iria's gender identity and gender presentation. And Iria left all that behind and went to San Francisco specifically for the opportunity to remake themselves into what they felt was the most honest version of themselves.
Nice.
And, the same is true of the Compton's Cafeteria riots, where here were all these trans women and all these street hustlers. And here was this place that was the safest place for them. And it was also incredibly hostile. And queer rage boiling over was one of those moments where they got to remake things in the image of what they wanted it to be. They got to say, okay, fine, if we can't feel safe here, then this place doesn't get to exist.
Was it
And
your
I feel
point?
like that's really powerful.
Oh, it is.
Yeah.
It's super
No,
powerful.
absolutely.
Was it your point to actually highlight queer moments in history, or is that sort of a byproduct of you telling a really good story?
Yes and no.
Okay.
I wanted opportunities to highlight queer moments especially in San Francisco's history,
Right.
but I wanted to avoid. It's so easy to fall into the trap of like, I've written a queer book, so now it's got to be about coming out or it's got to be about AIDS.
Mhm.
And it's not that those are not worthwhile stories. Those are very important stories. And a lot of other people are telling them better than I will. So I wanted to look at other parts of the queer experience at the same time.
Mhm.
And so like there's a scene in the third book where they go visit Twin Peaks Bar, you know, and they talk about the fact that like this is the first bar in America that was a queer bar that had windows you could see through. You know, the fact that that Compton's cafeteria was also a place of queer joy, because it was the place where a lot of people maintained their friendships. It was where a lot of people like basically had family dinner every night at 2 a.m.
Right.
And that there is this aspect of the queer experience that is, yeah, we have lots to be angry about, but we also have a lot to be happy about. We have a lot to be proud of. And it's important to remember that like we experience both sides of that coin, that there's a whole spectrum of queer experience. And yeah, absolutely, like tear the place down and set it on fire, rage is on one end, and unmitigated joy is on the other. And we experience both of those and everything in between.
Nice.
Have you ever used? Since I lived in San Francisco, I'm curious about some of the things you may have used. Did you ever
Sure.
use Marion and Vivian Brown in any of your San Francisco escapades?
No. In fact, I don't know.
You should. You
I would
should.
love to hear about them. I'm planning to use Lily and Coy, but
yeah, no. Marion and Vivian Brown are two identical twins, and they made themselves into famous celebrities of San Francisco. But I think they would make like great oracles in your story because they look exactly alike. They were always seen together until one of them passed. Vivian died in 2013 and Marion died the following year in 2014. But you always saw them together. They would water, and they were always impeccably dressed. Like they would have matching outfits. You knew they were the twins wherever you went, you know. But I think they would make great, like, you know, with your supernatural touch to it. You should have them as be oracles because they are quintessential, along with Emperor Norton. They are quintessential San Francisco celebrities. Huge.
I am absolutely stealing that suggestion. Yes.
Awesome.
Just look them up. You will love them, and you will say, "Why did I not know about these ladies before?" Trust me.
Yeah, I am planning in the fourth one they're going to meet Lillian Coit, who is
okay, good, yeah,
you know, the person who's
the Coit Tower.
created Coit Tower,
who created the big phallic symbol of all firemen.
yes, the AFAB person who dressed as a man so she could gamble in the Barbary Coast gambling dens, and they built a giant phallus in her honor, and I love it. I just love her so much. So I actually I got an email. I had written a blog post about her at one point as part of like a talking about interesting queer people from San Francisco history. I got an email from her like great niece or something who said, I'm a relative of hers. She is a legend in our family. And I loved getting to read that other people appreciate her story. I was just like, okay, I am validated. I am using her in a book.
Nice. So not to move on, but time is time.
Yeah.
And slipping through time, talking about queer futures, your Autumn Detective series, though sci-fi and alternate world, right?
It's a sci-fi. It's like far-flung sci-fi. Okay. It's post-apocalyptic. It's our world.
It's French fry.
Yes. It's funny you say that because of an editorial note I got on the second one where it's in the far future and honorifics are all just like M. And one of the editors who worked on it added a note that said, am I supposed to believe that everyone is French in the future? And I was like, I don't speak French. I don't know if that's a thing in French, but I promise that they are not all French, if that matters. Anyway, it's far future sci-fi that's post-apocalyptic. So it's set 12,000 years from now, and
Okay.
to them, we are their Atlantis myth. Like, they know that there was a civilization that preceded them. They know that that one achieved some things. They don't believe the legends about it, like that they did things like go into space, because that's crazy. Nobody's ever going to go into space. That's impossible. But they do. We existed, and they know that we achieved some pretty interesting things. Their entire technological framework is about bioengineering and genetic manipulation.
Hmm.
And in the first one, the detective character, the perspective character, the narrator of it, because it's all first person, this guy named Valerius Bacum, he is he's what's called an arty. He's an artisanal human. He's somebody who was made the old-fashioned way
Ah,
instead of being designed, and that sort of gives him a special designated status where he is excluded from certain kinds of medical care, for instance, and things like that, because arties are treated as too special to let them have normal lives.
hmm.
They're the genetic backup copy in case the human genome gets stretched a little too thin.
Gotcha.
And so he feels a lot of resentment about that. And anytime we talk about the future, obviously in science fiction, we're also commenting on the present.
Mhm.
Otherwise there's no real bridge between the reader and whatever it is we're telling them about. But that's an opportunity to edit our current circumstance and to imagine improvements on it and sort of a different path. And so with the first one, I wanted to talk very explicitly about the queer experience, and especially about the way that queer bodies are policed in society. So morality laws against queer sexuality or anti-trans bills, of which there are more this year than there ever have been
Right.
in state legislatures nationwide. And HIV and AIDS criminalization, which isn't even a thing that I knew about as a queer man growing up in the 80s and coming of age in the early 90s. I didn't even know that that was a thing until the Biden administration started trying to do something to roll some of that back. But it was a lot of discriminatory laws against people with HIV were passed in the 80s, thinking that it would discourage behaviors that might transmit HIV, but instead what it did was discourage people from getting tested.
Right.
So, there's so many different ways that queer bodies have been policed. I mean, you look at the history of ACT UP and the fact that a lot of their whole point was there's just no funding being put into HIV and AIDS research and pharmaceutical research because it doesn't matter, because it's queer people. The idea that a gay disease doesn't need to be dealt with. And you look today at monkeypox, and what was the immediate media narrative? That it was a gay disease.
Yep.
And so it just didn't matter for anybody else, So a lot of stuff like that is a part of the queer experience. The way that trans people are denied access to hormone replacement therapies, that, all these different ways that queer bodies are policed. And in the second book, which involves a major shift in the character's perspective and experience, then I wanted to talk about the ways that queer identity gets erased and dismissed. And I wanted to talk about the way that coming out or transitioning changes who we are in the eyes of the people around us. Because the people around us, when we come out or when people transition or whatever it is we do to present ourselves authentically to the world, people around us tend to see us as having changed, but we tend to experience that as having revealed the truth. And really, it's those people sort of imposing their preconceived notions on us and rebelling against the idea that we would ask them to change that.
Mm-hmm.
But we're experiencing, we're rolling in totally different directions on the same street. They think that we've changed, and we think that all we've done is finally admitted something or finally revealed something about ourselves. And so I wanted to talk about how that ability to force somebody to change their perspective is a kind of power. And the fact that we can roll up on somebody and say, no, actually, I'm a different person from who you think I am, and this is the real me, and you're going to have to deal with it now. That is a form of pushing back against those preconceived notions and of the power that the cishet patriarchy has over us. Because we are making the world relate to us differently when we do that. And I think we just need to lean in and go ahead and own some of that.
It's
Like,
exactly why, we have that whole part of queer trope where when someone does reveal their truth and then they go, "Oh, what have I done to cause this?" Way to make it about you. This is about me revealing my truth.
Hmm.
yeah,
And that's a part of that conversation, like you say.
yeah. And you look at moments of like the queer rage that boiled over, like Compton's cafeteria,
Hmm.
and that's an example of us standing up to the status quo and saying, like, we are who we are. We have endured your efforts to suppress us. We're still who we are anyway, and now that's over. We are choosing to end that.
Hmm.
We
Right.
are choosing to take control of the situation. And I think that that's a really powerful message. And I wanted with the second book to depict a character whose identity was very much a metaphor for the queer experience, and having a big change in that identity so that he could be the person to say to the world, like, I am now taking control of how you see me.
Right.
And now you have to see me my way, and you can just get over whatever it is that you brought into this circumstance.
Right.
I feel like we have a lot to teach the world as queer people. And a lot of those lessons that we have learned the hard way.
Yeah.
And as queer people, we have to develop like a ton of resilience against the oppression and the suppression that we experience. And it stinks on ice that we have to develop that resilience. But by gum, I am going to survive the world that we live in. And if that means that I have to teach the people around me to leave me the hell alone sometimes, then that's okay.
Yeah.
I'm willing to do that work.
Yep.
So this second book was New Life in Autumn.
Yes, the second book is A New Life in Autumn. Well,
Okay.
it's New Life in Autumn.
New Life in Autumn. Yeah. Nice.
Yeah.
So in the face of that, and I hesitate to say suffering, but suffering,
Yeah.
how can we make the joy bigger?
I think that it's a lot of what we talk about when we as queer people talk to each other is about queer trauma,
Mhm.
and I look back on, in the before times I ran a local queer book club and things like that. And those were really important, like, social connections for me. And a lot of those conversations and a lot of that time spent together was focused on like processing queer trauma.
Mhm.
And I think that like we do that in therapy, at least I do that in therapy. And, we kind of drag all that around behind us for the rest of our lives. And I think that it's easy to let that overshadow queer joy. But I think that the way we like combat that and the way that we help ourselves recover from that is just finding the parts of queer life that like get us out of bed every morning, things that give us a purpose, and it doesn't have to be like curing cancer or solving world hunger or whatever, although those are admirable goals.
Mhm.
And anybody engaged in that work is a great person. But it can also just be like enjoying the friendships that we have. It
Right.
can be the fact that at that queer book club, after we got done talking about whatever incredibly traumatic book we had just read, then we would talk about our lives. We would sit around and joke. We would, talk about Star Trek or whatever, We would talk about what we were watching on TV. We would talk about something we'd read for fun. And I think that that part of it is the part that it's very difficult for us to realize we need as badly as we need it. And at the same time, in some ways, it's a very natural part of like friendships and associations to adopt. It's easy to like, if you've got a friend to talk about what's going on in your life, it's hard to remember that that is itself a kind of queer joy, that that is itself a form of healing. We think that in order to heal, we can only ever look at the trauma in our lives. But in reality, part of healing is learning to balance these things. Like, I like that there are books that exist that are just queer joy, and that's
Mhm.
great. I don't write those personally because I write horror, but I think that it's good that those exist. But if see a book that is like all joy with no acknowledgement of trauma, then it's very difficult for me to relate to. And
Right.
I think, like I say, that's probably why I write horror, because horror lets you confront terrible things and then defeat them.
Mhm.
But I think that at the same time, it's really important that we acknowledge the queer trauma as part of
Mhm.
processing it, and then we don't have to wallow in it. we can make room for, all the other stuff in the same characters' lives. Because like real queer people reading these stories need to hear, yes, your trauma is valid, and they need to hear you also have a reason to get up tomorrow. You have a
Yeah.
reason to face the world. You have a reason to stay alive,
Yep. You
And
go
we know there's
balance.
an audience for it out there because, one of the things I've always championed about, well, I'll just use Stranger Things as a great point. I think it's why it resonates with so many people because there is the queer element, and I'm not just talking the characters, I'm talking about the otherness of those people, those characters that are in this story, that are central to this story. And I think there are far more people who have been ostracized as other than mainstream was ever willing to admit. And I think you're right. I think, especially like in the horror genre, you have the opportunity to take that and turn it around and say, here is my strength, and I'm going to confront this, and I'm going to beat it. And I think that that's one of the reasons why shows like Stranger Things is so successful, because it allows people to connect on many levels with the characters and what they're going through, not only from a sentimental, nostalgic point of view, but also because they see the power in claiming who they are and being the best that they are with what they're given. You know what I mean?
Absolutely. I with the vampire series that I wrote, it's about a gay, really curmudgeonly, very bitter old vampire who like grew up in the 40s. He came of age in the 40s in America as a gay man and decided that he was tired of being called a monster and he would show people what a monster was. And he's got some issues, but he also has this cousin who's this like little go-go twink dancer from the 60s who also became a vampire. And he became a vampire because he wanted to see what the future would hold forever. He didn't become a vampire because he hated life so much that he wanted to become undead. He became a vampire because he wanted to be a part of life for so long. And I have gotten emails from readers who have said my favorite parts of that entire series are just moments when Withrow the curmudgeon and Roderick the little happy twink are just talking. They're just like sitting on their porch having a conversation, because there's just like so much there about these are the two sides of the queer experience, and it is so important to remember both and to recognize that like we may never feel like we are a part of like the bigger world. We may never feel like we are center stage in the bigger world, but there are spaces in the world for us and we can find each other.
And an audience for those spaces.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, absolutely. I wholeheartedly agree about Stranger Things, especially, and about just like horror in general. Even if you look at stories that are not marketed as queer horror stories, a lot of times they're very queer stories.
Yep.
You look at Scream, and the experiences that Sydney has are very alienating, and they're very much about like the cishet dating world is going to be bad for you, and and your friends are never going to understand what you've been through exactly, and people are not going to believe your story when you tell it to them, and you're always going to feel like you are potentially in danger. That's a very queer story in a lot of ways, and those movies are very much about her finding friends who understand and maintaining those friendships across decades. Look at Halloween 2018, where you see Laurie Strode 40 years later. She has let the trauma that she experienced totally isolate her from the world. And the only way that she has to survive is by reaching back out into the world and like letting the people who care about her care about her. I feel like horror in general is so good at communicating queer experiences. And it doesn't even have to say that it's about queer experiences, but we definitely see ourselves in those stories.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Oh, I hate to cut this short, but we're running on time.
Sorry, I'm a talker.
No, I love the conversation. Like I said, I hate to cut it short. I mean, something you said about balance made my little Libra heart sing with joy. So,
as a fellow Libra, yes.
So what's up next for you?
So next is the fourth Norton book, the fourth Servant Sovereign book. It's going to be called The Last Scene of a Strange Career. And that one is going to be time hopping across many different parts of San Francisco history. Then, at some point this fall, my publisher is putting out a 10th anniversary edition of Perishables, which is the first in that vampire urban fantasy series about the curmudgeonly gay vampire. And I don't know the release date yet, but I went back through it and added 6,000 words of footnotes to talk about like the places that are real places, the people that are real people, what inspired parts of it and an afterword, and that was really fun.
Congratulations on the 10th anniversary, by the way. That's huge.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I realized abruptly this summer that it was the 10th anniversary of it, and I wrote to my publisher and said, should we do something for this? And he was like, yeah, send me a footnoted copy. We'll do an author's preferred text. And I was like, great,
nice.
Here we go. Yeah, I cleaned up a little bit. There was one scene I really wanted to fix for 10 years, and I fixed it.
There you go.
And I told him I would make so few changes he would not need to run it past an editor. So there we go. Then the third autumn book is going to be called Hard Won in Autumn. And then I'm at the same time kind of on the back burner working on an Appalachian ghost story novel that I kind of plan to use to see if I can find an agent potentially. And that one's going to be this like Appalachian ghost story, cosmic horror, folk horror, queer, being made to go back home to a place that is not home kind of story. And I'm about halfway through that.
Very nice.
And it's like got, weird magical bluegrass and all kinds of stuff.
Cool.
And in terms of appearances, I'll be the guest of honor at the inaugural RETCon in Cary, North Carolina in February 2023.
Nice.
Yeah, you can find out more info at ret-con.org. And then my podcast, Arcane Carolinas, that I co-host, is doing a spooky spectacular now through Halloween. So we're publishing a ton of episodes this month and next month. And we're doing a couple of live events locally.
Very fun. Any final words of wisdom?
Oh, gosh. I mean, we all know this, but I think it pays to be reminded family is not biology, and biology is not family.
All right, we'd like to extend a huge thank you to Michael G. Williams for being with us. Michael, thank you so much.
Oh, thank you. Thank you very much for being here.
Our
for
pleasure.
letting me be here, rather.
Anytime. Anytime.
We're glad you invited us.
I'm so accustomed to doing Arcane Carolinas that for a second I was like, oh, I need to remember to thank the guest, Oh my gosh.
All right, folks, we Written on the Edge are proud to introduce you to new media by queer content creators. So if you enjoy learning about these artists, please like and subscribe so you get the alerts for new episodes. Now, on to our review.
Hey, gals, gays, and days. Welcome back to our review. This week, we have a very interesting offering. We are going to be talking about a movie that was recently released. I think it came out in late 2021, and the movie is called Wildhood. It is the story of two brothers embark on a journey to find their birth mother after their abusive father had lied for years about her whereabouts. He said she was dead. Along the way, they reconnect with their indigenous heritage and make a new friend. I've got quite a bit to say about this, so I'm going to give you the floor first.
No, let's hear yours.
No. I want yours first, and then I'll talk.
No, I promise I won't alter mine. But I've gone first the past several times, so I'm making you go first.
Okay, all right. I think this film was probably my favorite film of 2022 so far.
Nice.
Because this kind of story is needed on so many levels. It is Native representation, and God bless Canada for having the balls to actually produce something of this nature. It speaks to Native issues, often in mixed race. The Native kid tends to be really oppressed because he's trying to fit into a society that wasn't built for him from a cultural standpoint. So one of the things I loved about this movie was its pacing, because it was very, very honed on Native pacing in telling a story. Natives aren't obsessed with talk. Sometimes it's the visuals in life that tell the biggest parts of the story. So Native storytelling lends itself very easily to cinema verite. And that's one of the things I loved about this movie. I also think the two leads, and I will give their names, Philip Lewitsky, who is actually part Mohawk. He's French, Ukrainian, and Mohawk, which I thought was very cool. So I was eyeing him. I'm like, if I write my Beware of Mohawks Bearing Gifts, I'm like, that guy could play one of the characters. And Joshua Ojik, who is a Siboney and Cree nation. He's actually a full blood, whereas Philip is mixed. And I like that each one of them had that position culturally within themselves as actors. They both have incredible training. Philip attended the Lee Strasberg Institute. I mean, these kids come with major cred. And I think we're going to see more and more of Philip, definitely. He just wrapped up a production with Steven Spielberg. So it's going to be nice to see a native actor really starting to gain his ground. And I also like the Ukrainian slant of him. I think that's kind of cool too. So
I figured you would.
Yeah, it's very, very timely. I like the combination. So go team. Anyways, I also loved the style with which, or the way, and I should mention that Brenton Hanum, who wrote and directed this, it's loosely based on his life and his upbringing as a queer native two-spirit man. And he was frustrated that this part of native society wasn't being talked about enough. So he wanted to make a film that really addressed this issue, and I think he did a beautiful job of it. I think he's another director writer that's going to be worth watching, where he will go. And the fact that he pulled the direction off, and I don't know if this is his first film. I didn't really look into his past as much, but he definitely has the ability to tell a good story and tell a very balanced story. All of the characters were perfectly drawn. I liked all of the casting. Everybody did their job beautifully. I liked the way that the elders represented when he finally makes his way. And then one of the most beautiful sequences I love the most is when Link, played by Philip, finds a building where that his mother was, and he puts the dress, or a dress that he found in the closet, and he puts it around his neck and hangs from his chest as if it's his mother's embrace. And he looks at the picture, and then he finally has a moment to break down and let the anger out, which will help him start healing. And then I loved the element that they talk about Tiger Lily. You keep seeing this Tiger Lily showing up. And great native reference, and the for pop culture reasons, and right. The fact that it turns out to be a drag club was just fucking brilliant. I just really fucking loved that. That was one of my favorite things in the whole damn movie. And it was also interesting to see Link struggle with his burgeoning queerness and not knowing how to react or what to do, and then to have a very, very prominent native actor, Michael Grey Eyes, playing a character that was walking him through an accepted part of native culture, and to eschew the Western culture stuff that's been put on him and let him realize life has many journeys. And I really loved the way that was shown, and the way that the queer factor folded into the story. It was very organic. I think that Joshua's portrayal of Pasme was beautifully executed. Both of them have won awards on the Indian independent film circuit for this movie. And I think they were well deserved. This was a really, really wonderful film, a rare gem of a film that's hard to find sometimes, but when you do, man, they become a fast favorite. And this is what I will definitely watch over and over again, because I know there are elements in it that I just really, and a good point. One sequence that drove it home for me was a sequence where Pasme is teaching Link how to dance, and his half brother, who is all white, looks at him and he says, "You look like a douchebag." And the complete shutdown of Link when that happens. And Padme's rebuttal to his little brother and, saying, what the hell was that? Why did you have to say that?
What's your
really
problem?
distilled the cultural differences and the cultural oppression that is present in this film. And so,
Right.
again, that was another reason why I liked the film.
And that's a clarification I do want to make, because the synopsis says the boys are going off looking for their mother. It's only Link's mother. They share a
Right.
father. They did not share a mother.
Right, exactly.
But Lincoln took his younger brother because their father was extremely abusive, and he could
Yes.
not leave his little brother in that situation.
Yes. And I loved at the end that it was very clear the three boys were going to remain together.
Yep.
That was
Yeah, they made the new
that
family.
Yeah. So found family, which is definite queer theme, was present
100%.
in this movie. Yeah, yeah.
100%. So I'm going to floor everyone and say I loved a teenage movie. I don't generally like them, and as
No,
knows
definitely.
this. However, this time I felt that the teen anger and the teen rebellion and all of the teen lashing out was portrayed so beautifully that I not only accepted it, I was there for it.
Yeah.
The kid had a reason to be mad, a very solid, strong reason. And he had a very solid reason for feeling lost and trying to find his place in the world and not understanding it when his place was coming to him and offering him warmth, and still he pushed it away. There were reasons for it. And this was the film for me that made that, and I hate to say enjoyable to watch, made it great cinema for me.
Gratifying.
Yes, thank you. That's a much better way to say it.
Yeah.
I loved it. For me, it was a look into a culture that I did not grow up in and have only seen in media and culture. And the storytelling is astounding and wonderful. I can't recommend it enough.
Yeah.
I've already recommended it to people since I watched it 3 days ago.
Yeah. It is. It's a gem of a film. It's rare when you find a movie like this that is so quietly released and it is out there, and then to discover how amazing it is. And it covers a topic that is very rarely covered. So kudos to Brenton for having the wherewithal to get the funding for something like. In fact, we were watching it, and my husband's like, "Damn, how many companies are involved with the making of this movie?" But I told him, I said, that's what it takes to get queer movies made. And God bless Canada for having the balls to actually do it, and get it out there. Because God knows in this country, it'd be a lot harder. We've had Brent Hardinger on here who has explained, and you can go back, I'll link his video. But he talked a great length about how hard it is to get queer movies produced in the United States. And
how many changes the production companies placed on the original art, because his Geography Club film was not the book that he wrote.
Right, exactly, on so many levels. And so it's really, it's kind of a wonderful thing when the original vision is carried forward and it is presented in the way that it was meant to be presented. So this one is 5 across the board for me. So that's my ratings.
Believe it or not, what you just talked about with the multiple production companies is the only place I dinged it, because there were elements of the production quality that were so incongruous internally that I had a hard time at some points. There's a scene where the boys are in a car, the radio is blaring, and they're having a conversation. I couldn't hear the conversation. The radio was so loud that I felt like somebody on the audio side of things missed something. And so there were a couple of those moments where, like Beth said, multiple production companies.
I will agree with you on that. There were some audio imbalances. That's about the one thing I could ding it on, but I chose not to, just because of the importance of the film.
I'm doing it because I come from a world where hearing loss and issues are an issue. So if you're going to watch this, be ready for it. That's all I really wanted to say about that. So yes, otherwise it was 5s, except I gave production quality and then sound lighting score 3.5. Which gave my overall a 4.5.
Excellent. So that's our review of Wildhood. We highly recommend you go see it. As Van said, he's already recommended it to 2 different people to say, watch this film because it impressed him so much. Again, and your point about the audio thing, that's one of the things about doing independent films.
I know.
No, I know, but I'm just saying that's one of the things as a viewing audience, you need to understand just how difficult it is to get these things produced. And so sometimes certain things fall through the cracks. Also, I would caution that for people who love action movies and all that, this is not that kind of film. This is true native storytelling in the way that natives see storytelling, in that not everything is linear, not everything has a reason to be there, but it is, and so it is absorbed, it is taken in and understood for what it is, what it represents, but it doesn't necessarily always have an answer.
True, but don't. I just want listeners to not be scared of your linear comment. Anything that was a flashback was very clearly a flashback. There was no confusion there whatsoever. The filmmakers handled that beautifully. Yeah.
It's a good balance. It's a very good balance. So looking forward to see what Brenton does down the road, because if this is his opening gambit, I think this guy is one to watch as a creator.
Absolutely.
So. All right, moving on to what are we on about? What do you want about?
I have been, since our Democrats aren't that great about hyping their own successes, I have been trying to follow the money in the bipartisan infrastructure bill. And an article popped that made me so happy this week. The U.S. is going to plug more than 10,000 abandoned carbon-emitting oil and gas wells in 24 states. Apparently, our DNR and government have known about these for a while, and there was no money for it to plug them. But yeah, these things are just sitting there emitting carbon into the air that's not being captured or used for any purpose whatsoever. And so now that the money's been put to it, they're being plugged. Yay, save the environment. That's what this bill was about. Partially. I understand roads were an issue too.
Well, you need to be able to get there to do what they're doing.
But this is the type of success that should be announced. People should be aware of
absolutely.
This.
As I said before, Democrats are great at snatching defeat out of the jaws of victory. So we need to get much better at tooting our own horn.
Well, I'm not even tooting. I don't even want it to be a pat on the back. I want it to be here's how that decision has affected action. That's what it needs to be. That people need to see that not only was a decision made in a hall of power, but then that was carried through into action. That's the important piece. And I think sometimes our government is too hand-wavy behind the mirrors, and it needs to be a lot more transparent. So stuff like this needs to be, here's what we did with some of the money, and here's how it benefits you and the planet.
Right. Excellent. So I have talked a bit about my fascination with the rabbit hole that is YouTube, all things YouTube. I found a really interesting news source, because I watch a lot of foreign news via YouTube. So I watch France 24, I watch Deutsche Welle. So I try to take in other news agencies around the world talking about the topics that everybody's interested in. And I found that there's a new resource out on YouTube called Kyiv Post, which is the Ukrainians' major global newspaper to the world. And so that's kind of their BBC. It's kind of their state. It's not state run, because UATV is the state run one, but it's definitely supported by the government to get word out there about what Ukrainians are doing on the ground in their country, their aspirations to ascend to the EU and potentially NATO further down the road. And so I found it to be a really good resource. I just watched, just before we started this recording, I just watched a video of a female journalist talking with a Ukrainian general and discussing what he could about where things were and how things had transpired and how the big Kharkiv offensive occurred and why they took advantage of it when they did. And it was interesting to watch from that perspective. And then she got to a point where she asked about, what role do women play in this? And he was very forthright and said, look, we can't do this without them. They are in every aspect. They're on the ground. They are also agents. They're also working in administrative. They're coordinating, relief efforts. He said they are very important to our whole drive to establish freedom and sovereignty within our country. So it was nice because this is something you would not hear in Russia. Women are often sidelined. They're mothers and they make babies and they make food, and that's all they do. That's the way Russian mentality is, especially in the military circles. Mm-hmm. So to see a Ukrainian general acknowledging and actually saying we can't do this without them, that was refreshing to hear from a former Soviet enclave, so puppet state. So I really, really enjoyed that. So I highly recommend if you want to take in other news agencies, remember to use Ground News to do your little research, find out where they fall on the spectrum. But I have found the latest post from Kyiv Post on YouTube to be very interesting and worthwhile to watch. They only do like interview segments right now that they're putting out, so they're very new. They're just starting to gain subscription memberships. I think they're at 10,000 now. But so it's just starting to really come up. But I think the work that they're doing is admirable. So I highly recommend people check them out.
Nice.
So who won your week?
The American Players Theater.
Oh, okay.
It is not nationally known, so I better explain myself. The American Players Theater is a local, I think they have 3 or 4 locations in Wisconsin, outdoor acting troupe. They've been in Wisconsin for 12 years that I've been following them. It could have been longer. But the location near Madison is set at the top of a hill in a natural bowl where the stage is down at the bottom. Very outdoor Shakespeare. And as a matter of fact, they do a lot of Shakespeare.
Well, almost Athenian.
Oh, yeah, that too. So they're famous locally for doing Shakespeare. However, they also do other things that have a tie to Wisconsin. And I have been gifted for my birthday tickets to go see A Raisin in the Sun by Lorraine Hainsbury. And it was phenomenal. If you don't know the story, find the book, go see the play, something. It is
movies. There are several movies out there.
That's true. It is about a black family, it's kind of like right after World War II in time, who receives an insurance check for the death of the patriarch. And it's a $10,000 check back then. It's kind of the equivalent, the way they're portraying it is about $100,000 now. But it's right at the time where black families wanted to move into the suburbs like white families, where women wanted to go to college, and where men had dreams of starting businesses to support their families. And because of their skin tone, it was all an epic struggle to get anything done. So suddenly this family has this money, and each sort of individual in the family has a different dream for it. Beautiful play. Go see it. Like I said, find the movie, read the book. But the way this cast portrayed it was astounding. Easily half, if not more, of the audience had tears in their eyes at the end. For very good reason. It's a very satisfying ending.
It is.
That won my week. Plus, my first theater experience since COVID. That has significance too.
Okay, cool. I like that. Okay, so mine is a YouTube thing, but it is so gratifying to watch. Who won the week for me this week there's a channel called Echo Heroes, and it's exemplary of several channels that are like this. But what it is a group of people that go out on boats and find sea turtles that are encrusted with barnacles. And they lift the turtles out of the water, they keep them wet as they work on them, and they remove all the barnacles from the turtles, which actually harm their shell over time. And so they actually pull them, and it's just wonderful because when they put you would think, well, why would this be? There's just something so gratifying watching this beautiful turtle emerge under, and some of them look like freaking barnacle cities. I mean, piled up on top of their backs, and underside too, and to see it removed and to see the turtle emerge clean, And then when they go to put him back in the water, they're flapping and they're just so happy. You can just tell there's an exuberance in the turtle as it's being returned to the ocean. It's just wonderful. It's just, when I want something to pick me up and make me feel good, I will watch one of, like I said, one channel's called Echo Heroes, Echo, ECO dash Heroes. It's just gratifying.
Eco Heroes?
Yeah, Eco Heroes. Yeah, okay. I guess ecology. Yeah, you're right. But it's just a gratifying thing to watch and to see these little turtles swim off, and you can tell they just feel as light as a feather in the water as they used to. They don't have this drag happening, with all these barnacles that attach to them. So it's just really, really satisfying, and it just makes you feel good to see people do some really random acts of kindness to sea animals, and just a lovely thing. And there's one out there I haven't fully watched, but I did see it pass by on my feed because I've started watching this, so YouTube tends to give you more of what you've been watching. Mm-hmm. And there's one evidently where they did barnacles off a whale. Now, that one has me really curious. I definitely want to check that one out. I don't know how you would pull that off.
It's not like you can pull it up into the boat.
I know. So I don't know if they go as divers and they swim with it and remove barnacles off its fins, because that's pretty much where on a whale it's on the underside and on the fins. Mm-hmm. So the only thing I can think of, is that they swim along it in diving outfit and they pull them off that way. Yeah. But yeah, so I haven't watched that one yet, so that's one of the ones I'm going to catch soon. But yeah, it's very gratifying. It's such a little thing that you could sit there and eat lunch and watch these videos. There's no talking. It's usually just you watching them get cleaned up, and for some reason it just makes me feel happy. I watch it and I'm thrilled that these turtles are getting this kind of service from people around, and it's from different parts around the world. So it's not like just U.S. people are doing it. They have people off of the coast of India that are doing it, and in Chile, so you get to see these different areas around the world, and they're all commonly doing it the same way. So,
nice.
Yeah,
that's awesome.
They won my week.
Any final words of wisdom?
Watch Wildhood. Watch turtles getting clean.
There you go, folks. Written on the Edge is produced by Rogue Ravens Media. For our disclaimers, links to social media, our listen stations, or to sign up as a guest, visit www.rotepodcast.com. If you enjoy learning about new artists, please like and subscribe so you can get the alerts for new episodes. Tune in next week for your queer media fix.
Bye-bye!
What's that? Closing time. The bums rush in melody, dear.